It's no secret that the EU's migration and asylum policy has failed. The bloc had years to get its act together, yet people from almost every political spectrum would agree that things have got even worse since the arrival of large numbers of migrants and refugees in 2015-2016. How did that happen? Let's start with the most obvious one. The journey across the Mediterranean Sea remains deadly for many migrants. 896 people died in the first 6 months of 2021, according to the International Organization for Migration. And these are just the official numbers. Since 2014, an estimated 20,000 people have died trying to get to Europe. Many bodies have never been found. Others are buried, often in unnamed graves, like at this cemetery on the Italian island of Lampedusa. And this is despite the obligation on all marine crews under international law to help anyone in distress, no matter who they are and why they're in trouble, unless it would endanger the captain's own ship or crew. Throughout the last years, the EU has drastically decreased its search and rescue missions at sea. The only official EU missions are led by Frontex, but we will come to Frontex later. Right now, NGOs rescue a significant number of those who are shipwrecked. These NGOs often have issues finding a harbor to take the refugees, which can leave migrants stranded on a boat for days. NGOs are often accused of two things: of colluding with smugglers and supporting human trafficking. There's no evidence to back that up. And of encouraging more departures from the North African coast. This is a popular argument among conservative and right-wing politicians. For now, researchers say more data and research are needed to get the full picture. But most studies suggest that the push factor, war, political persecution, and extreme poverty is higher than the pull factor, for example, better economic conditions. The EU's border agency Frontex is being given more responsibility by the day. It's based in Warsaw and has a mandate that will see its workforce swell to 10,000 by 2027. At the same time, the agency's budget will rise to an annual 900 million euros. In 2026, it was 19 million euros. Frontex is set to become the EU's biggest and most heavily funded agency. But at the same time, it's criticized for its inefficiency. A report by the European Court of Auditors in June 2021 found that Frontex is unable to fulfill its duties, for example, dealing with migrants and refugees arriving in the EU. The report said Frontex is failing to provide sufficiently effective assistance to EU countries in fighting against illegal immigration and cross-border crime. Speaking of crime, you may have heard of so-called pushbacks. That's a political term for the act of pushing back migrants and refugees at the EU's external borders. The thing is, pushbacks are illegal within European territory. Anyone reaching the territory of an EU member state is usually entitled to apply for asylum and have their case heard. Frontex has been accused of involvement in illegal pushbacks at the Greek-Turkish sea border. German news magazine Der Spiegel published research in October 2020 suggesting Greek border guards sent refugees back into the sea. The European Ombudsman opened an inquiry into the allegations in November 2020, and according to a working group of the European Parliament, Frontex has failed to prevent human rights violations. The EU is being criticized for its involvement in some dodgy business with Libya. Only recently, German NGO Sea-Watch shared video footage which they say shows Libyan Coast Guard shooting
They're shooting. Yeah, they're shooting.
How is that the EU's problem, you may ask? Well, Libyan coast guards are trained by the EU and receive EU funding to intercept migrants and return them to Libya's shores. The bloc calls this border management. Libya is a war-torn country. There are frequent reports of migrants being sent to detention centers where they are abused and tortured. That doesn't exactly align with European values. In 2020, Moria, possibly Europe's most famous refugee camp, was destroyed in a fire. The camp on the Greek island of Lesbos was massively overcrowded and massively criticized for its living conditions, especially during the pandemic. Now, this is telling because Moria was designed as a model, a so-called hotspot. The idea was to process asylum applications within a few weeks directly on Lesbos and on other Greek islands. Those whose applications were rejected would be sent back to Turkey as part of the 2016 EU-Turkey deal to curb migration to the bloc. That didn't work out so well. Many migrants were left waiting for months or even years for their applications to be processed. When Moria was destroyed, some people were relocated to other EU countries. For thousands of asylum seekers in the new camp Karatepe on Lesbos, conditions continue to be dire. Right now, asylum applications are subject to the so-called Dublin Regulation. This means asylum seekers usually have to apply for asylum in the country where they first touch EU ground. These are mainly EU member states with external borders, especially those in the south. Fair distribution mechanisms across the EU do not work, as some EU countries refuse to take in asylum seekers at all. Obviously, many say the system needs to be revamped. Obviously, the criticism is that this system should have been revamped years ago. And it is true that the European Commission, the bloc's executive, put new proposals on the table in 2020. But still, there's been no progress. One of the only things, if not the only one, that EU countries can agree on is the need to protect the Union's external borders and deepen cooperation with non-EU countries in order to reduce migration to the EU. But externalizing the control of EU borders makes the bloc vulnerable to blackmail, as we saw at the Turkish-Greek border in 2020, and only recently at the border between Morocco and the Spanish exclave of Ceuta. What it comes down to is the EU's migration and asylum policy has failed because its member states still cannot agree on joint solutions.